teaching us how to do something effectively. He's teaching us how to harvest in this season. He's telling us how to reach people in this season. And here's the big surprise. It's kind of just how we were reached. It's kind of how love reached us. It's kind of how God reached us. It's in all those super normal ways that God found us in the middle of our stuff and picked us up and rescued us and put us in a good place. And he develops us and he teaches us and he trains us. And then he asks us to do the same thing. A couple weeks ago, we talked about it's not about me. Who was here for that message or saw it online? You still talking about your circus and your monkeys? Okay, it's not about me, right? It's not about my strengths. It's not about my weaknesses. It's not about me because it's all about him. Everything that we talk about in terms of purpose is really about him. It's in doing everything that I do for the glory of God. It's about his glory. It's about his fame. It's about his honor. It's about getting my eyes off myself to see him. And so we talked about that. It's not about me. And so today's message, we're picking up Pastor Jay spoke last week and just fit right in with exactly where we're going. But today we're going to talk about it's still not about me. So, it's still not about me. Turn to your neighbor and say, it's still not about me. It's still not about, turn to your other neighbor, it's still not about me. Man, I know, shock and awe. You thought maybe I would change my mind in 2 weeks, but nope, still not. Still not about you, still not about me. There's still a bigger picture that we're stepping into. And it's so liberating, but it takes a discipling and a training of the mind to shift into a mindset that is about others. We actually live in a culture that is completely self-absorbed. I remember seeing several years ago, sometimes when I say, I'm like Pastor Paul on this one, I say a few years ago and it actually turns out to be like 10. But I remember, I can't even remember which makeup brand it was, but their slogan is, I'm worth it. Has everybody seen that? It's like, it's in the magazines, it's on TV, because I'm worth it, because you're worth it. And I remember the first time I saw it and I thought, yes, I am, I should have that. And then I thought, that's sort of stupid. Like, I have kids to feed, I got a house to pay for, I've got electricity to pay. So really, do I need the $30 face cream? Now, I was younger then, so no. But now, yes. Some things change over time. Needs and wants migrate. And so, but I remember thinking it was such an interesting thing, a comment on society, that we were in such a place that the best marketers, the best minds that sit down and put together these multi-million-dollar promotional things feed our appetite for ourselves and tell you you're worth it. You should think about you. What do you want? What do you need? How do you feel? What are you getting out of it? How much have you spent on you? How much time have you spent on you? It's really about you. And it's become this thing, North America, it's an interesting thing because it's become this common thing, this common place, this common identity of our culture. Self-awareness is a huge buzzword. We have to be self-aware. And we're all supposed to practice self-care. Yeah. Self-care, right? What do I need? How do I feel about? Now, it's not that we don't need to take care of ourselves, but what's happened is this subtle slide into how I feel about everything determines what I do with anything. How I feel about each circumstance, each situation, each relationship, my money, my time. It's totally about me and how I feel about it. And it's totally counter-Bible. That's the interesting thing, is that we've moved into a culture that is counter-Bible. And I think about this in terms of Jesus' life. Jesus is our perfect example. And today, as we talk about purpose, we're going to just go off of his life and what he modeled to us. But one of the things that I think is interesting about Jesus, for starters, is the amount of time he spent by himself. Now we know that he needed to spend time with the Father. He went off by himself. First thing in the morning, last thing at night, he spent a lot of time with just the Father, in prayer, in who knows what all he did there. And then he had times where he was just with the 3 disciples. And then there was times when he was with the 12. But you see him consistently pulling off by himself. What that tells me is that probably he was somewhat introverted. There's a probability he wasn't thriving off of hanging out in the temple. He wasn't like, go Jerusalem. Like he was off by himself on the mountain praying. And part of that is spiritual strength. Part of that is physical strength. Jesus had to be renewed. We know that introvert, extrovert is really just about where you draw energy. It's what feeds you and what draws from you. And so Jesus was fed in the solitude, in the quiet place with the Father. But Jesus goes out and regularly, when he's on his way to go and have some quiet time, people come to him, they follow him, they chase him down. And it says things like Jesus had compassion on the crowd. And he sent everybody else ahead. He sent his disciples ahead, but he stopped to minister to the broken, even though that wasn't on his agenda that day. So he took himself and his self-care and what he personally wanted, and there were times to focus on others. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit today, and where is the balance between self-care and selfish? Ouch. Okay, where's the balance between self-care and selfish? There are studies right now, psychological studies, where they're mapping out the connection between depression and selfishness. And I don't know if it's a chicken and an egg thing or whatever, but it seems that people who are the higher percentage than normal, higher percentage of people who are bound in depression have high levels of selfish tendencies, and they are fully absorbed in what I think, what I need, how I feel. And if they can get these same people to start thinking about others and start reaching out, it breaks the hold of depression. What does that tell us? It tells us that our mind and emotions even are not made to think about ourselves. They are made to serve others. They are made to give. They are made to pour out. We're designed to live in community and to live love. The first thing when God made Adam and he said it's not good that he's alone. I mean, think about it. Talk about your ultimate self-care. Adam had like everything in the garden. He had God, he had himself, he had everything he needed to eat, to do, whatever. He was just totally good. Sometimes we get so busy that that's all we want. It's like, that sounds like heaven. Actually, if I could just be myself in a tropical place with God, it would be perfect. But God looked at him, and we don't know the time gap there, but there was a little space of time, and God went, it's not good for him to be alone. I'm going to make a helpmeet comparable to him. So he brings him a partner, and then he talks to them about, you're no longer 2, but 1. And essentially, your body doesn't belong to you anymore. It belongs to your partner. And he teaches right from the very beginning, your life is best fulfilled giving to another, serving another, pouring out for another. It's in our original design. So we're going to go through today Jesus' model of this and kind of break down what it is that we're looking for as we look at a harvest season this summer. And I believe God's going to launch something this summer that is our tool for the rest of our lives. He's going to teach us stuff this summer that we will carry on forever. We are going to be awakened in areas that we've never been awakened before. We're going to realize that God can use us to do stuff that we never thought we could do before. And it's amazing. Pastor Jay last week mentioned that Pastor Lizzie says all the time, each one, reach one. And it's a really common phrase, actually, but it's literally that simple. Each one, reach one. Each one of us has something to give to somebody. Maybe we don't all feel like we can stand in front of a crowd of 5,000 people and preach or sing or whatever, but each one can reach one, and Jesus modeled this for us. I want to just give us a couple foundation scriptures before we get into the meat and potatoes here. Philippians 2, 3, and 4. Philippians 2, 3, and 4 is not about those called specifically to church ministry. This is the body of Christ. This is us as believers. It says, let nothing be done out of selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind, let each one esteem others better than himself. let each of you look out not only for his own interests, but also for the interests of others. That's a very interesting passage. Just if you look at that, let each one of you look out not only for his own interests, but also for the interests of others. And here's one of the things, we'll just leave that up there for a bit. Here's one of the things that is an issue within the church. We have at times gone off the other side of the rails, where we say, let each of you not look out for his own interests, but only for the interests of others. And people have been so burnt out in church ministry that they can't even cope anymore. They don't care for themselves. They don't care for their kids. Their kids grow up, and as soon as they can leave home, they just want nothing to do with the church, because everything that was ever spent in this house was spent on church stuff and whatever. But it does not say, do not look out for your own interests, only the interests of others. It says, do not look only for your own interests, but also for the interests of others. So what has happened is, as a result, I believe there's so many in the body of Christ who said, well, we're not gonna just keep pouring out like that. We can't just keep doing that. It's not sustainable. And so we stopped looking out for the interest of others. And we decided, because I'm worth it. And something shifted. And God's bringing us to a place of middle ground right now. Balance. When God is center, things are balanced, right? Remember that message? When God is the center, things are balanced. So we look out for our own needs and also for the interests of others. And there should be a healthy place to look at our lives and say, is there inflow and is there outflow? Is there something that I'm receiving, and is there something I'm giving? I have to take care of myself, my kids, my spouse, the issues of my life. But if I don't have an outlet, I will die a little bit inside. And emotionally, we begin to shut down. And we become unhealthy mentally because we are not designed to live selfish. So self-care needs to be combined with other care. That connection needs to be there. I read an interesting quote. Is Pam Landry here? Pam sells Mary Kay. She's awesome. But yes, there you are. So Mary Kay Ash had this quote, and it was her business model from the beginning of her business. But she said, pretend every single person you meet has a sign around his or her neck that says, make me feel important. Not only will you succeed in sales, you will succeed in life. And I thought, what a good quote. If every single person you met, it wasn't just how can I serve you, but if you imagined a sign that said, make me feel important. What if each one reached one that way? What if each one of us looked at every single person we met and we looked them in the eyes and we imagined that phrase, how can I make you feel important? What can I do or say, or how can I engage with you right now that makes you feel important? And it's not just about making people feel important, they are important. So when we say that, we're saying, how do I align with the Spirit of God? How do I align with what God says about this person, about this situation, about this family? God sees them as important, valuable, worth giving his life for. So are we treating the people around us like that? It's very important when we're talking about how do we share the love of Jesus. This is a basic tool. So I thought that was really, really awesome. Jesus fulfilled his prophecy on his life. He came, we've been talking about that the last several weeks, when Jesus said, I have finished the work which you have given me to do. I have completed what you've given me to do. Jesus had a universe-changing mission plan. Right? Talk about purpose, talk about master plan. He had the plan of all plans to rescue all of humanity. He had an assignment. And Jesus fulfilled it and still ministered to people one-on-one. Still paused for the one. He reached one. He paused for one. John 5:19. Jesus said, most assuredly I say to you, the Son can do nothing of himself, but what he sees the Father do, for whatever he does, the Son also does in like manner. Paul said in 1 Corinthians 11:1, imitate me as I imitate Christ. So Paul said, imitate me. He's talking to us. Us imitate Paul as he imitates Christ. Christ says, I'm not doing anything but imitating what I see the Father do. And what we see consistently is the love for the one. What we see is the care for the one. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Break this down. What we see is because Jesus cared for one, because Paul cared for one, because we've been called to reach one, it means that the Father, it means that the fullness of the Godhead cares about one. One person. One neighbor, one family member, one friend, one server at a restaurant, one caregiver in the hospital, one nurse, one doctor, one truck driver. He cares about one. He cares about one enough. When we start looking at what does it cost us to reach our city this summer, and 40,000, we're like, okay, that's a lot of money. Do you know Jesus would say that's nothing for one? That'd be worth it for one. For one, he modeled it. And what kind of one? Jesus looked for all sorts of ones. And that's where we need to go today. We need to talk about the kinds of people that Jesus reached. There's a passage that I read last week, Matthew 25, 34 to 40. And it talks about what is happening when we're reaching the one. Matthew 25, 34 to 40. It's the judgment seat at the end of time when we stand before God, and God not only is looking for, are we born again or are we not, but what did we do with our life? What do we do with every day that he gave us? And it says, the king will then say to those on his right hand, come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was a stranger and you took me in. I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you visited me. I was in prison and you came to me. Then the righteous will answer him and say, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? When did we see you a stranger and take you in, or naked and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and come to you? And the king will answer and say to them, assuredly, I say to you, inasmuch as you did it to one of the least of these, my brethren, you did it to me. Every one that we're going to talk about today, every one is a representation of God himself. Everyone who is breathing, that kind of opens it up. Everyone who is breathing is carrying the very breath of God himself. Every angry person you've ever met, every cranky person you've ever met, any poor person you've ever met, any rich person you've ever met, any person who's discouraged or frustrated or joyful and celebrating, every person who's breathing is carrying the very breath of God himself. And so when we stand before God, God looks at us and he goes, okay, how many ways did you minister to me? Who did you see my life in? Who did you see my breath in? And I'm going to go through today 7 particular kinds of people that Jesus stopped for. 7 ones that Jesus stopped for. And we read the big stories. Jesus ministered to he fed the 5,000. That was only the men. Counting women and children was probably 10,000 plus. He ministered to massive crowds. He would negotiate and dialogue and stuff in the city centers. But he stopped for ones all the time. And this summer, if we will recognize the ones, they become the crowds. And we're not trying to build a church or fill the seats. It's because this motivation, what you've done for the least of these, you've done it for me. Every act of love that we can give to one this summer is service to the Lord. Every act of love that we can give to one honors and glorifies God. And so this morning, let's talk about some of these things. One of the people that Jesus stopped for, number one, the person everyone has given up on. The person everyone has given up on. And I'm going to give you scripture references. We're not going to go through them, but just write them down so you can study them a little bit later. Luke 8, 43 to 48 is the woman with the issue of blood. The woman with the issue of blood. And the story with this woman is that she has been sick for 12 years. For 12 years, she has had an incurable disease that has made her absolutely unfit to be in public. Anybody who knows what's going on with her knows that she's unclean. She's not supposed to be there. She has exhausted her resources, seeing every possible doctor, every possible physician, every possible spiritualist, every possible option she's ever had. She's exhausted it to the point that she's not only just deathly sick, but she's completely bankrupt. She is at the end of herself. And the interesting thing is that the story is Jesus is walking through the city, and there's a crowd pressing against him, and he pauses and he says, "Who is it that touched me?" Verse 46 says, "Somebody touched me, for I perceived the power going out from me." It's an interesting thing because Jesus, in the middle of a crowd, middle of people pushing, on his way from one place to another, he's got an assignment, and yet he feels life coming out of him. In other words, he gave of himself to somebody else, and he actually stops the procession to minister to her. What's really interesting to me is that she had already received her healing. She touched the hem of his garment. Jesus feels the power go out from him, which means she was already healed. Jesus could have just kept walking. He could have just kept going, and well, that's awesome, somebody got healed. Who knows how many others touched him? Who knows how many others put a draw on him? But Jesus pauses and calls her out. Why? Because he was restoring her. Because she was the one that everybody said, you know what, she's hopeless. We don't know what to do. There's no answer for this. There's no solution. There's no way we can meet her need. We've tried everything we know to try. Basically, we're just going to disregard her at this point. It's an interesting concept because we all have people in our life like that. People who are so far gone, they've been going through the same thing for so long, we don't know how to help them, and it's very easy to stop caring for them. It's very easy to stop ministering to them. It's very easy to look aside because if something could be done, something would have been done. But Jesus paused and gave her his attention. The interesting thing with Jesus here is that what she received from him was firstly health. Secondly, he noticed her. We as carriers of Jesus Christ also carry the miracle of health. We also can pray for the sick and they will recover. We also can minister into people's life. But most importantly, we can notice them. We can call them up from the dust. We can notice the people that everybody else has stopped looking at because they don't know what to do. And we can pause and give them attention. Go for a meal. Go for coffee. Have a conversation. There's something incredibly valuable about knowing you've been seen by God. Just knowing somebody notices that you're on the earth. Somebody notices what you're going through. Somebody notices that you're there. So Jesus ministered to the one that people had given up on. Number two, this is an interesting one. Jesus ministered to the person who doesn't want to be a bother. The person who doesn't want to be a bother. And the story that goes along with this one is Luke 7, 1-10. And it's the story of the centurion who has the sick servant. And you remember the story, he's the one where Jesus says, I've never seen such faith like this. But the centurion has a servant who he loves. And he's dying, there's no answer for him. And so it says specifically that the centurion sent Jewish leaders to go ask Jesus if he would pray for his servant. He doesn't even come himself. And Jesus turns around and goes, yeah, let's go. Let's deal with this situation. Jesus pays attention. But what's the twist here that we notice is in verse 6, it says when he was already not far off from the house, the centurion sent friends to him saying, Lord, do not trouble yourself, for I am not worthy that you should enter under my roof. I am not worthy that you should enter under my roof. One of the things that I have learned over the years is that the people who most don't want to be a bother, I'm sorry to bother you with this, I don't want to be a trouble, I know, are often the people who are struggling with worthiness. They don't feel like you want to talk to them. They don't feel like you have time to minister. They question their own value. They question their own worth. Here's the centurion who he's a leader among leaders in his area, but he does not feel worthy to have Jesus come. And it goes on and he says, actually, that's why I didn't come to you myself. I didn't feel worthy to ask you personally. I sent a messenger. Do you know, sometimes we need to pause and notice the not squeaky wheel. There are people who we perceive to be healthy and strong and doing okay because we don't hear from them, and we can over-minister to the ones who keep going. And there's people that just drift into the sidelines, and truly, if we look at it, very often it's because they don't feel worthy. I want to challenge us this summer. Jesus did this. Jesus could have said, absolutely, be healed in Jesus' name, done it from a distance. Jesus did that stuff all the time. But there was something in Jesus' knower that knew, I need to actually go to him. I need to go to his house. I need to minister into his life. And it ended up being this huge God encounter, but Jesus went to the one who didn't think he needed a direct contact. It is time for us to notice the people around us. It's time for us to notice our friends, our family, our neighbor, our bosses, our coworkers, the people who we think maybe are doing okay, but are silently suffering. How do we notice them? The Holy Spirit, if we are surrendered to him, if we partner with him in this way, if we submit ourselves to what God is planning, he will nudge us. But what you're going to have to realize is that your mind will tell you, oh, I think they're doing okay. They seem fine. Because they're not a squeaky wheel. But if God causes somebody to cross your mind, somebody to cross your heart, call them. Take them out for coffee. Send them a note. Do some little thing to let them know that you see them, that God sees them, that they have value, that they have worth. We need to look for those people on purpose. The third person is the person that everyone has gotten used to ignoring. So the first one was the person everyone has gotten used to or has given up on. The third person is the one that everyone has gotten used to ignoring. So we want to find the non-squeaky wheel, but then we also want to pay attention to the squeaky wheel. This is the needy one. This is the person who yells all the time. And Mark 10:46-52 talks about blind Bartimaeus. And the story, I mean, what a title, hey? You could look it up in your Bible. He's called blind Bartimaeus. It's like Fat Charlotte or something. You know, it's just or whatever. Like tie your thing onto it, whatever. But so blind Bartimaeus is this guy who he's got this name because everybody identifies him with what he thinks is holding him back. They look at him, and they don't just see Bartimaeus, they see that he's blind. And he's been blind so long that he actually has the beggar's coat that's issued for that purpose so that he's authorized to beg. He just stands there and begs all day, every day. It's the only way he gets to eat. He just begs all day. So when Jesus is passing by, Bartimaeus starts yelling, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. And the crowd has been so used to listening to him squeak about this and yell and beg all the time. They're like, shut up. The master is busy. You just need to stop it right now. This is not your time. Like honestly, he is like, I need a touch from God. But they've listened to him every day. I need money. I need food. I need clothes. I need money. I need food. I need clothes. I need money. I need food. I need clothes. And the day he goes, I need Jesus, they're like, stop it. Just stop whining. And Jesus is in the crowd, walks past him, and hears back here, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Jesus stops everything and says, bring him to me. Bring him to me. Some of us need to be awakened to the fact that there are people in our lives, in our spheres, in our workplaces, in our neighborhoods, that we have deemed needy. And because they are needy, we miss sometimes the cry of their heart. And we cannot allow our selfishness to allow us to be calloused and cold toward the one who needs Jesus in this moment. There may have been years and years and years of I need stuff, I need a bailout, I need a handout, I need help. But maybe today is the day that it's not just about a sandwich. Maybe today it's not just a little extra help with the rent. Maybe today it's not just a pity party. Maybe today is the day of salvation. And what if we miss it? See, Jesus stopped for the one that everybody else had gotten used to ignoring. Number 4 is Jesus stopped for the one that everybody was suspicious of. The one that everybody thought was a snake, because he was. Zacchaeus, Luke 19, 1-10. Zacchaeus was a tax collector who, admittedly, when you read it through all the Gospels, Zacchaeus robbed the people. Zacchaeus went, okay, here's your taxes. I'm going to add on a little extra for today and a little extra for tomorrow. And it says he got rich off the people. And so they were completely suspicious of him. They're like, this guy will take you for everything you'll give and then some. So stay away from him. Everybody just ignored him. They didn't want to see him. It was like when Zacchaeus comes up your street, you shut the door, lock the door, because that's that guy. That guy who wants something from you all the time. He is that guy. And it said he was super rich. He had a position. He had money. But he also had no connection with the people at all. They all mistrusted him. Oddly enough, Jesus comes to town. Zacchaeus is a... Everybody remember the song, Sunday school song, Wee Little Man Was He? He was short. And if you didn't go to Sunday school, I'm sorry. But you missed out on some greatness. Musical greatness. But Zacchaeus was a wee little man who climbed a tree so that he could see Jesus. He was so short and so small, he couldn't see Jesus in a crowd, but he wanted to see who Jesus was. So he climbs a tree, and Jesus is walking by with all the people, and you can almost hear the crick of people's necks as they turn and go, typical. He's up there looking down on us, and you can tell he's just like waiting to see who can get the money from today. He's probably, watch your pockets, hang on to your purses, Zacchaeus is in town. You know, there's like this thing. And Jesus looks at him and he goes, hey, Zacchaeus, you better hurry down from there. I'm coming to your house for supper. What? Jesus goes to Zacchaeus' house for supper voluntarily on purpose? Zacchaeus doesn't even invite him. Jesus invites himself to Zacchaeus' house. That's crazy. But it says there that when they started questioning Jesus, they started questioning, why would you even go there? You know he's a sinner. You know he's a thief. Jesus gives us a perspective on what it is he sees. Because in verse 10 he says, the Son of Man has come to seek and save that which was lost. Jesus didn't see him as a snake. Jesus didn't see him as a thief. Jesus didn't see him as a crook. Jesus saw him as lost. What if the people in our lives that we are very standoffish, I'm not saying be unwise, but I'm saying, what if we went out of our way to ask God to show us who they really are through his eyes? What if we didn't see them as bad, we saw them as lost? Lost makes all the difference in the world, because who of us is any good when we're lost? Who of us without Jesus has anything going for us? But Zacchaeus was lost in Jesus' eyes, and Jesus went out of his way to find him. Who's the Zacchaeus in your life? Who is it that God's calling us to reach this summer? Number 5, Jesus went out of his way to find the one who had messed up repeatedly. The one who had messed up repeatedly. The one who is beyond help. And we see this in John chapter 4, one of my favorite passages. It's the story of the woman at the well, who Jesus goes out of his way in the daytime to go to a well where the women normally gather, to meet a Samaritan who the Jews don't talk to, and she's a completely immoral one at that. And she comes and begins to talk to him, and he prods her with the question, and he says, talk to me about your husband. And she says, well, I don't have a husband. He's like, oh yeah, I know. You've had 5 husbands, and the guy you're common law with right now is not even your husband. But something about how he said it was not judgmental. It was informative. Because you would imagine if it was you and somebody said that to you, there would be that full-on movie-style face slap and off you go, right? Maybe just for the ladies. But that thing where you actually, how dare you confront me with my stuff? Jesus was obviously saying it in a way that was like, you got stuff. You've screwed up a lot. There's an answer for that. And there's love in it. How many people, some of us have family members who are drug addicts, alcoholics, long-term issues that have just been on repetitive cycle. It's so tempting. It's so tempting to walk away and go, you know what? It's been 15 years. I don't think it's ever going to change. Sometimes you just need to look after yourself. But then there's the Jesus model that says, you know what? It's worth another shot. And Jesus comes and, he talks to her about her stuff and just offers himself. She becomes the first evangelist. She runs back to her town and says, oh my goodness, I have met the prophet. I have met somebody who's told me everything I ever did, and introduces them to the Messiah. She's the first evangelist that just speaks forth the love of God in such a pure way because Jesus stopped for the one. The one. Even after he left, number 6, Jesus stopped for the one with the misguided giftings, which is Paul. Acts chapter 9 talks about Paul's conversion experience. Paul is the guy, we've talked about him in the last few weeks here, but Paul is the guy who spent his entire life in deep religious training and then goes on this murderous mission to round up Jesus' people, Jesus' followers, and destroy them. He imprisons them. He sees them killed and stoned. He is after all this. Jesus comes to him. Jesus could have just taken Saul out. But he reaches him on the road and he says to him, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? Gives him an opportunity to answer. And in a moment, the presence of God comes and Saul realizes, I've had it completely wrong all this time. And interestingly, in a matter of 3 days, something completely changes to the point that Jesus sends Ananias to deal with Saul and to speak into his life. And he says about him, go, for he is a chosen vessel of mine to bear my name before Gentiles, kings, and the children of Israel. What Jesus is saying in this space, he comes out of the heavenly realm to find Saul, put him on the right track. He's saying the gifts that I gave him, the purposes that I planned for his life are just a little off track. We need to get them realigned. We need to get them turned in the right direction. There's a ministry in Texas right now that does exactly this. They've been dealing with criminals in the prison system, mostly drug dealers, mostly people from gangs, people that have been rounded up because of their illegal activity. But what they've realized is as they're looking at them and they're trying to minister into their lives, that if they were really, really, really good at selling drugs, they probably have an entrepreneurial spirit. God's probably given them a mind for business. And so if we can get them saved and healed up and delivered and give them some proper business training, by the time they come out of prison, they'll probably be the kind of people that will be millionaires in the kingdom of God. And they have this massive success rate because they're taking people whose gifts have been misaligned and pulling them into the purposes of God. What are the people around your life? Is it possible that what they're thriving at that seems so deeply wrong is just misaligned, misfueled? And maybe if we see them and we stop for the one that's just a little off and it gets connected to God's love, what if they are those people that are radical voices for God's love? Radical people in the kingdom of God. It's the people whose giftings are misaligned. Number 7, and the final one we're going to cover today, is Luke 18:18-30. This is the one with everything. Who did Jesus stop for? The one with everything. And this one needs to be addressed because for us, in our society, it is one of the hardest things to see how to minister into an affluent population. It is easier to say when somebody doesn't have clothing, somebody doesn't have food, somebody is homeless, somebody is struggling. It's easier for us to know how to reach into those situations. But Jesus actually paused for the one that had everything. And interestingly enough, the centurion also had everything. But Luke 18 to 30 is a story of the rich young ruler who was, according to the word, he was what we would call a good man. He was the guy who did stuff right. He had kept every law from his birth. He knew God. He loved God. From a distance, he did all the right stuff, and he had a lot. And Jesus, here's the interesting thing. Jesus knew all things. So Jesus knew really what the end of that story was going to be. And he could have said to himself, this is going to be a waste of my time. This guy is all up in his own head, and this is not going to go very well for him. But Jesus loved the rich young ruler and modeled for us the fact that everybody gets the choice to say yes or no. Everybody deserves to hear it once. Everybody needs to hear the good news. Everybody needs to have the offer of love. Everybody needs to know that there's another way. And what's really sad about it is that the rich young ruler actually walked away from Jesus and turned him down and said he was sad because he had much possessions, much stuff, and he was sad because Jesus wanted him to give it away. Jesus was looking for his heart, but the rich young ruler turned him away. One of the things that I feel very passionate about in our society, in our city, in our region, is that we cannot, when we're looking at outreach, we cannot just look for the obvious. We have to see every single person. When you go through this list, the person who everyone has given up on, the person who doesn't want to be a bother or doesn't feel worthy, the person who has gotten used to ignoring, the person everyone has gotten used to ignoring, the person everyone is suspicious of, the person who messes up repeatedly, the person who has the misguided giftings, and the person with everything. Jesus modeled for us that those are the ones that he came for. The ones. And sometimes they receive it, and sometimes they don't. And it's not failure on our part. What is failure on our part is when we never share it in the first place. When we never love in the first place, when we don't see accurately and care in the first place. What people do in response, how they choose, whether they receive God's love or not, that's their choice. That's totally up to them. But our responsibility when we stand before God is when he says, I was in prison and you visited me. I was hungry and you brought me food. I was thirsty and you brought me drink. Whether that's natural or whether it's spiritual, it's the thing where we meet the need that's right in front of us. We speak into the life that's right in front of us, and they get to choose. Our win at the end of the summer is not necessarily based on how many people actually have a conversion experience with Jesus this summer. Our win is, did we do everything we are doing for the glory of God? Are we serving him? Are we honoring him? He will build his church. I wanted to share with you this morning, this is a jewelry box I've had in my drawer for a long time, very long time. When I was a kid, I grew up in a church that, for whatever reason, completely embraced whole families. And so my pastor, Pastor Gilbert Summer, was the man that discipled my parents in their early salvation. He baptized me. He was the pastor of our church all through my upbringing. And I remember we hit this point in time where the church kind of was going through a hard time, and Pastor decided that it was probably time for him to leave, and they needed to, they were going to go to a different town, do some church ministry somewhere else. And I remember being utterly devastated. Like, to me, God and my pastor were pretty much almost the same thing. What I saw in my pastor was what I knew about God. How I saw my pastor's wife serve, that's what I knew about what God's love looked like. How I saw her love was what I knew about how God's love looked like. And so when they announced it, I remember like weeping and weeping and weeping. And I struggled with, I've always been a super passionate person. So because it kind of came out of a place of discord in the church and you know, people moving in some rebellion, I remember being deeply angry at these people. Like, how could you hurt my pastor? How could you do this? How could you cause these kind of problems? How could you cause this kind of hurt? And I remember just before they left, my pastor's wife brought this to me with a letter, and I've still got the letter inside, and you could tell it's impactful because it's when you keep something for decades on in life, it's meaningful. And in the letter, it said things like, you know, sometimes we go through hard stuff, but God is always teaching us in it, and he can always use it for his glory. And, you know, he's giving us a lesson, and I just want to thank you for being a friend to me. I want to thank you for, you know, when the dark clouds have come in and you know, it's been heavy at times, you have been sunshine. You have been light that has brought lightness to this whole experience. And, you know, we will love you and pray for you, you know, and carry on. And it was just like this incredibly affirming letter. And do you know what's really interesting about it? I was 14. I could not vote at the AGM. I did not put tithe checks in the offering. I did not have anything of importance to give. And yet my pastor's wife stopped in the middle of their personal trauma, in the middle of rebellion, in the middle of all that they were facing, to give me a gift, to write me a letter, to speak life over me. And you know, it's one of the things that I think is why I'm here serving in the church today. Because there was a window right there where I could have been so angry and so discouraged with the church and so hurt and so damaged by what had been going on in the politics. But somebody paused to speak life to me and minister love in the right moment, at the right time, to somebody who everybody else probably would have walked right past. I believe God's asking us as we approach this summer, as we approach today, who are the people in your life? Who are the people that need to be seen? Who is the one? For each of us, if you're here today, you've been Jesus's one. He brought you here today. He brought you into a community. He brought you into relationship. And now he's asking us to see the one. He's asking us to look out and see who he sees. Who is ready? Who is hurting? Who feels unworthy? Who feels judged? Who feels criticized? Who feels like they can't possibly get it right enough to come to God? Who's the one? I'm going to have the worship team come. And as we close today, we're just going to ask the Lord to reveal to us who the one is.